Well, it's Saturday, May 9th, 2015, and I'm going to tell you a story about my dad. My dad died when I was 11 years old, and so some of what I remember may be a little, iffy because I was a kid. Uh, my dad was in World War One. He fought for the Austro-Hungarian army, and he fought on the Russian front. He always said the best place for an infantryman was behind a tank. But my dad got captured by the Russians, and he was sent to Siberia. And his overall experience there was terrible. He said that he had to make a bowl out of a hunk of wood, and then he had to fashion a spoon also out of a hunk of wood. And they got fed once a day, and he called it gruel, and he said it was terrible. He said all the guards were Mongolians, and they were brutal. Uh, they weren't humanitarians, obviously, and they weren't compassionate or anything like that. He said that they would take leaves from the trees around there and try and make tobacco. And it didn't work very well. They would take nuts from the trees. I don't know what kind of trees grew there, so I don't know what kind of nuts. He said, but they would take the nuts and try and make coffee. And he said that it tasted a lot, well, not a lot, but the closest he could compare it to was chicory. And I tasted some chicory coffee once, and it was, ugh. So that wasn't apparently too successful either. I don't know if he was cutting wood, working in a mine. I don't know about that part of it. But there obviously were trees in the area because, like I said, they took leaves and nuts from the trees and tried to make things from them. But overall, it was just a terrible, terrible experience. And one day it just got so bad, they had a spontaneous mass break. All the prisoners just said, "The hell with it," and they left. And the guards laughed. I said, "Did the guards shoot at you?" He said, "No, they laughed." I said, "Why did they laugh?" He says, "Because they said we'll all die." So what I know of Siberia is that in the wintertime you can travel on the ice, on the rivers. The ground is solid. In the summertime, the ground is soft and a lot of bogs, and you sink in, and there's a lot of mosquitoes and bugs and stuff like that. So I don't know when they escaped. I'm assuming it was the wintertime, although I don't really know. Well, he and another prisoner made it to the Trans-Siberian Railroad. I said, "Did anybody else make it?" He says, "I don't know." He says, I really don't know. I said, "How many escaped?" He says, "Oh, maybe about 1,200. That's a lot of people. So they made it to the Trans-Siberian Railroad. They waited for a train to come by, and they hopped on to the couplings between the two boxcars. And they took turns sleeping. One guy would sleep, and the other one would hold him up and keep him on the coupling. And then they would trade. Then the other guy would sleep, and the other fellow would hold the other guy up so they wouldn't fall off. The whites were fighting the reds at that time. So when the train would come to a village, it would stop outside the village, and they'd send somebody up ahead to see who was in charge of the town. The town was, the train was in control of the whites. So if the reds were in control of the town, they would stoke the engine up, put it in full blast, and race through the town. If the whites were in charge of the town, they would stop in the town and try and find some food and supplies, water, and that kind of stuff. So one time they sent somebody up ahead, and he said the whites are in control. Okay, so the train went into the middle of town, or wherever the station was, and stopped. And all of a sudden, up on the second story of the train station, there was a false facade. And all of a sudden, the facades came down, and there were 3 machine guns up there. And the Reds just started shooting. They just shot up the whole train. And my dad, and I guess his partner, I'm not really sure about that, got out on the other side from where the machine guns were shooting, and they ran. They ran as fast as they could. And the train, the engineer, if he was still alive. Somebody got the train going, and they pulled out of town, and my dad got back on the train. I don't think he had to sit on the coupling at that point. A lot of people died, and they just got him outside of the. They got rid of him. I guess they just threw him off the train. It was horrible times. Apparently no time for ceremony or anything like that. So then he got into one of the boxcars. Well, he went as far with the train as he could, and then he had to start hiking, walking. And it got to be close to winter. Again, the time frames I'm a little confused about, but remember I was a kid and I don't remember all the details. And anyway, he was in Poland when winter started coming. And he figured he better hold up for the winter. So he saw this convent. So he went up to the convent and he made himself known. And I don't know if he had to ring a bell or knock on the door or whatever it was. And the Mother Superior said, we have no provisions. We can't provide for you. I'm sorry. And my dad noticed that the place was in bad repair, especially that the roof was leaking. And my dad said, look, I will spend the winter here and I will fix everything that needs to be fixed. He says, your roof is leaking badly. He says, I'll fix that. She said, well, okay, you can stay in the stable with the animals, and you're going to have to make do. You know, we have very few provisions, and what extra provisions we have to save for the army because they'll come around in the spring and want some of our provisions. I said, okay. So he he repaired a lot of stuff, and he stayed in the stable. And as it was getting towards spring, he got a little nervous because he figured when they came to pick up the rations, she might turn him in. She might give him up, you know. And so what he did was he slaughtered a pig, salted it, and then he wrapped it, and I think it was paraffin is what they called it. His main concern was that he didn't want the odor of the meat spreading out because it would attract wolves. And so and by this time he had acquired a Russian greatcoat, those big coats that Russians are famous for. And so he made pockets inside the coat, and he put the salted pork inside his greatcoat. And then he just took off, and he started hiking. And he had acquired a Russian fur cap also. So he hiked through the lines, or he went around the lines or something, I don't know. But anyway, he got back to Austria. And he hiked to his hometown, which is a town called Putzleinsdorf. It's about 40 kilometers from Linz. And the family home is in a bit of a valley, not a valley, it's a ravine, I guess. And a creek runs through that ravine, and that's where the family had its mill. They generated power with the mill, and they ground and made flour and things. He also sold electricity in the area, powered by this mill. My dad's at the top of the hill, and he gets all excited, and he starts running down the hill shouting, Hubert, it's Hubert, I'm home. And his father sees this guy in this Russian fur cap and this Russian greatcoat, waving his arms and shouting like a madman, and thinks it's crazy, man, so he goes and gets the shotgun. Now, my dad was one of 11 children. There was one daughter and 10 sons. And the daughter was at home, and she kind of ran the family, is the impression I got. But anyway, she sees him come in, and she can hear him, and the dad, by this time, is a pretty old guy. He can't hear so well. So she knocks the shotgun up so that when he shoots, the shotgun goes up in the air. She says, it's Hubert, it's your son, Hubert. So they all welcome him, whoever's there, and you know, they have a wonderful time. And he's tired. He's exhausted. He slept for like a day, I guess. But anyway, he gets up, he shaved, cleaned up, and sits down, and he wants to eat. He says, I'm hungry, I want some good food. So they bring him some food. My dad loved butter. He used to take a slice of bread, and you know how they serve you butter in a restaurant, those cubes? He would take 4 cubes like that and place one on each corner of the bread, and he would take 4 bites. And with each bite, he'd get one of those cubes of butter. So he's sitting there, and he's got the piece of butter. He says, where's the butter? He said, it's in the well. He says, well, I want some butter. He said, no, we have to save the butter for the rationing. The Burgermeister will be by Saturday, and he'll pick up the rations for the army. Dad says, oh, no. So he goes out to the well, and he brings up the butter, sits down, and does his thing with the butter, and he said, oh, you're going to be in trouble with the Burgermeister. He says, no, I won't. So sure enough, Saturday comes the Burgermeister with his horse and wagon to pick up the rations. And the Burgermeister looks down at my dad, who's standing there with a shotgun, and says, I heard you were back. He says, you get a week's furlough and then you're back to the front. My dad says, no, I'm not. This family has given enough to this war. Turns out that my Uncle Siegfried was a prisoner in Italy. 2 brothers had died. A couple others had been wounded. My dad says, this family's given enough to this war. Turn your horse and cart around and get out of here. We're not giving any more to this war. The Burgermeister says, I'll be back, and you better be ready to go. My dad says, I'm not going anywhere. Burgermeister turns his horse and cart around and leaves. Before the next week comes up, when the Burgermeister was supposed to come back, the armistice was signed. So the war ended. But the feud between the Burgermeister family and my family goes on to this day, I think. Anyway, I was up in Canada once for a wedding, and one of the people involved in the wedding was a member of the Burgermeister's family. And as soon as I introduced myself, he got all stiff. Said, oh, just the mere fact that I mentioned my name was Hubert Max Wigabauer. He didn't like that at all. So that's the story as best I can remember it. Some of the facts may be wrong. My sister claims that the Cossacks were involved somehow, but I can never get it out of her. How were the Cossacks involved? What did they do? I don't know. My Uncle Siegfried got exchanged in a prisoner exchange, and 2 of the sons died in the war, and a couple, like I said, were wounded. But it's a hell of a story. My dad really was a tough guy. Survived a hell of a lot. His biceps were so big, he couldn't touch his shoulders because his biceps got in the way. That's one of the things I remember about him. But he was a good man, and he survived a lot. And I'm proud he was my father. Love you. Take care. Go Packers.